Emma Collins was used to being invisible. She worked quietly in a marketing firm in Chicago, always finishing her reports on time, rarely speaking unless asked. She wasn't the type who drew attention. She preferred the background, the calm routine of her work. But that changed the morning her boss, Daniel Reed, stopped by her desk. Daniel was confident, sharp, the kind of man who seemed to have everything under control. His calm smile and clear voice made people listen. He was respected, admired, and to Emma, a little intimidating. "Emma," he said, holding a folder in his hand, "we've been invited to meet the new client in Seattle. I'd like you to come with me. You know the campaign better than anyone." For a moment, Emma didn't speak. She had never traveled for work before. The idea of spending 3 days out of town with her boss, the man she admired from afar, made her heart beat faster. She nodded quickly, trying to sound calm. "Of course, Mr. Reed, I'll get everything ready." The week passed in a blur of planning, packing, and anxiety. When the day came, she dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual, and arrived at the airport early. Daniel was already there, scrolling through his phone, wearing a navy blazer that made him look effortlessly polished. He looked up when she arrived and smiled. "Morning, Emma. Ready for an adventure?" She laughed softly. "As ready as I'll ever be." The flight was smooth, filled with quiet conversation about work and a few moments of unexpected laughter. Daniel had a way of making even serious topics light, and Emma found herself relaxing. She learned he liked black coffee, old jazz music, and that he sometimes worked late because he couldn't sleep. When they landed in Seattle, the sky was gray, drizzled with soft rain. The air smelled of coffee and sea salt. Emma had never been to the West Coast before, and everything felt different, fresher, louder, alive. She followed Daniel through the busy terminal to the hotel the company had booked for them at the front desk. The woman behind the counter typed quickly, then paused, her face tightening with apology. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reed. There seems to be a booking issue. We only have one room left under your reservation." Emma blinked. "One room." Daniel frowned slightly. "There should be two." "Yes, sir," the woman said. "But because of the conference this weekend, we're fully booked. It's one room, 2 beds. I can add you to the waiting list in case something opens up." For a second, the air seemed to freeze. Emma could feel her heartbeat echoing in her ears. One room. The idea made her stomach twist, not because she didn't trust Daniel, but because it felt complicated. She looked at him, waiting for his decision. He turned to her, his tone gentle. "If you're uncomfortable, I can find another hotel nearby. It's no problem." She hesitated, seeing the tiredness in his eyes from the long flight. "It's fine," she said quietly. "We'll manage. It's just for a couple of nights." Daniel gave a small, reassuring smile. "All right. Let's make the best of it." As they stepped into the elevator, the silence between them felt different. Not awkward, but aware. When the doors opened, they entered a modern room with 2 neatly made beds, a desk by the window, and a soft hum from the city outside. Emma set her suitcase down, pretending to be busy unpacking while her thoughts raced. Daniel placed his laptop on the desk. "We should review the presentation once more before tomorrow," he said. "It's a big pitch. I want us to be completely ready." "Of course," she replied, grateful for something normal to focus on. They worked side by side for hours, going over slides and notes. Daniel was focused, patient, and surprisingly kind. Every time she stumbled over an idea, he listened, corrected gently, and reminded her that her insights mattered. "You've done good work, Emma," he said at one point, his eyes warm. "Don't doubt that." The words stayed with her longer than she expected. She wasn't used to hearing that, especially from him when they finally finished. The sun had disappeared behind the skyline. Emma stretched her shoulders and smiled faintly. "I think we're ready." Daniel looked up from his laptop, nodding. "You did great today." She laughed softly. "We both did." There was a small pause, not uncomfortable, but charged with something gentle and new. Daniel glanced toward the window. "Want to grab dinner downstairs? There's a restaurant in the lobby. Might help us relax before tomorrow," Emma agreed. They walked down together, the lobby lights reflecting softly on the polished floor. The restaurant was quiet, filled with the murmur of other travelers and the clinking of glasses. Conversation came easily again, about work, about life in Chicago, about little things neither of them had ever shared before. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. When they returned to the room, she felt lighter. The city outside glowed softly through the curtains. She changed into her sleep clothes, a simple t-shirt and cotton pants, and turned off the lamp beside her bed. Daniel was already lying on the other bed, reading something on his tablet. "Good night," he said, his voice calm and low. "Good night," she whispered back. But long after the room went quiet, Emma stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the day, his smile, his voice, the way he made her feel seen. She told herself it was nothing, just admiration for a good boss. Still, something had shifted. The trip that was supposed to be all business now carried a feeling she couldn't name. She glanced toward Daniel's side of the room. The soft glow from his tablet had faded, but she could hear him turn once in his bed, restless, just like her. Maybe he felt it too, that quiet, unspoken current between them. Emma closed her eyes, trying to push away the thought. She had always kept her life simple, predictable. But as the rain began to fall outside, tapping against the window, she wondered if simplicity was something she really wanted anymore. Maybe, just maybe, this trip wasn't about business at all. And though she didn't know it yet, that one small twist of fate, a single hotel room, would open the door to something she had never expected: connection, change, and a feeling that would follow her long after Seattle. She drifted to sleep listening to the rain, unaware that her heart had already begun to change. The next morning came quietly, with the sound of rain brushing against the window. Emma woke early, still half unsure if yesterday had really happened. The trip, the room mix-up, the quiet dinner, the shared silence before sleep. Daniel was already awake, sitting at the small desk with a cup of coffee, his focus fixed on his laptop screen. He looked up when she moved. "Morning," he said warmly. "Hope you slept well." She nodded, though she hadn't. "More or less." "You?" He smiled faintly. "Could have been better? Too many ideas running in my head." They both got ready quickly, moving around the small room in quiet coordination. It felt strangely natural, like two people who had done this before. Emma noticed small things: how neatly he folded his tie, how careful he was not to take up too much space, how he always said "excuse me," even when he didn't need to. Those small courtesies made her feel at ease. The morning was busy. They met with the local branch team, visited the client's office, and rehearsed for the presentation. Daniel led the meetings confidently, but he often looked at Emma for her input. Every time he did, she felt a spark of pride. By afternoon, the rain had grown heavier, and they returned to the hotel early to refine the last details of the pitch. Daniel set up his laptop on the desk, while Emma sat on the edge of her bed typing notes. The sound of rain outside filled the silence between them. For the first time, it didn't feel awkward. It felt peaceful. She could hear the low hum of Daniel's voice as he read lines out loud, adjusting slides, asking for her opinion. "What do you think of this tagline?" he asked, turning the screen toward her. She leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his. "Maybe simpler," she said. "Something that sounds more personal." He smiled, impressed. "You're right. You have a good instinct for this." Emma looked down, a faint warmth spreading across her cheeks. Compliments from him meant more than she wanted to admit. Hours passed like that, working, talking, sometimes just sitting quietly. The outside world faded. Around 6, lightning flashed beyond the window, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Daniel looked up, amused. "Seattle weather's testing us." Emma laughed. "Guess it doesn't want us to rest." When the lights flickered again, Daniel got up and checked the window. "Storm's close," he said. "If we lose power, we'll call it a night." But when the storm finally broke, heavy rain, loud wind, they didn't stop working. They sat together at the desk, sharing the soft glow of the lamp, surrounded by the sound of rain. Something about it felt intimate, safe. At one point, Daniel leaned back and sighed. You know, I can't remember the last time I slowed down like this. Emma tilted her head. You slow down. That doesn't sound like you. He chuckled quietly. Yeah, I guess not. I've been chasing goals for so long, I forgot what it's like to just be. She watched him for a moment, the calm in his eyes, the honesty in his tone. Maybe that's what trips like this are for, she said softly. To remind us we're still human. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, the air changed. No words. Just understanding to people, realizing they'd both been running too fast in their own worlds. The power blinked out suddenly, plunging the room into near darkness. Emma gasped softly, and Daniel laughed, his voice calm. Guess that's our cue to stop working. He found his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam lit up his face. Softer now, his expression gentler. You okay? She nodded, smiling nervously. Yeah, just wasn't expecting that. Stay where you are, he said. I'll grab a candle from the front desk. But before he could move, the lights flicked back on. They both laughed quietly, the tension breaking. Crisis averted, he said. Sitting down again, they decided to order dinner to the room. When it arrived, simple sandwiches and soup, they sat by the window, eating while watching the rain pour down. The city lights blurred into soft reflections. Daniel spoke about his early days in the company, how he'd made mistakes, how he'd learned to lead without losing himself. Emma listened closely. She had always seen him as confident, maybe even untouchable. Hearing his struggles made him seem more human, more real. You make it look easy, she said. He shook his head, smiling. It's not. But people like you make it easier. Her eyes lifted to meet his. People like me, he nodded. Hardworking, honest, you remind me why I still love what I do. The words stayed with her. She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled and looked away. The rain softened after a while, and the night grew quiet. Emma returned to her bed, turning off her lamp, while Daniel stayed up a little longer, reviewing notes. She could see the glow of his laptop from her side. You should rest, she said softly. In a minute, he replied. Go ahead. She turned away, trying to fall asleep, but her mind wouldn't settle. The sound of rain, the faint tapping of keys, and the warmth of the quiet room made her heart race. She wasn't sure what was happening, this closeness, this new awareness of him, but it scared and thrilled her all at once. Eventually, she drifted into half-sleep. She woke later to the sound of Daniel closing his laptop. He turned off the last light, and the room fell into darkness again. She heard him sigh, not tired, more thoughtful, and then silence. Emma lay there, eyes open, listening to the rain. There was something comforting about knowing he was just a few feet away. It was strange how quickly familiarity could form, how two people who had only shared polite office conversations could now share a space that felt so private. Her thoughts wandered to the way he had looked at her earlier, steady, warm, almost protective. She wondered if he saw her the same way she had begun to see him, not just as her boss, but as someone who understood her quietness, her careful nature. The clock ticked softly. The storm outside faded, replaced by a calm hush. Emma turned once, glancing toward his side of the room. He was asleep, his breathing even, peaceful. For the first time in a long while. She smiled to herself without a reason. She didn't know what the next day would bring, the presentation, the long hours, the trip home. But in that quiet hotel room, with the city asleep around them, something gentle had started to grow, not loud or reckless, but steady and real. As she finally closed her eyes, she thought about how life sometimes changes in the smallest ways. A shared laugh, a moment of silence, a storm that forces two people to stay inside and simply talk. She didn't want to name what she was feeling yet. Maybe it was admiration, maybe something deeper. But one thing was certain, she would never forget this night, the rain, the laughter, the warmth that filled the space between them. Because sometimes the heart begins to change quietly, long before we realize it's happening. And as the last sound of rain faded, Emma drifted into a deep, calm sleep, unaware that this was only the beginning. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the Seattle skyline glistening under a pale sun. Emma woke to the smell of coffee and the quiet sound of Daniel typing. He was already dressed, neat as always, wearing a light gray suit that somehow made him look even more composed than usual. "Morning," he said with a smile, glancing up. "We've got a big day ahead." Emma sat up, brushing her hair back. "You're up early," she said, stretching. "Couldn't sleep much," he admitted. "Kept thinking about the presentation." She smiled faintly. "You always think about work," he chuckled softly. Guilty as charged. There was something easy about their conversation that morning, a calm rhythm. As if the awkwardness from sharing a room had quietly faded. They both knew the boundaries, yet there was an invisible comfort between them now. Emma prepared quickly, feeling both nervous and excited. She had worked on many projects before, but this one felt different. Maybe because Daniel trusted her. Maybe because she didn't want to let him down by the time they reached the client's office. The city was alive, people rushing through the streets, the smell of fresh rain in the air. Daniel led the meeting confidently, his voice steady and professional. But what surprised Emma was how often he turned to her for input. When she spoke, the clients listened. Her ideas landed perfectly, her words clear dot as she explained one of the campaign strategies. Daniel glanced at her, pride flickering in his eyes. It was a small moment, but it filled her with quiet strength. After 2 hours, the presentation ended with applause. The lead client shook both their hands and said, "You've got the deal. We're excited to move forward." Emma's breath caught. They had done it. She turned to Daniel, who grinned for the first time that day. Not his usual business smile, but something real. "We did it, Emma," he said. And before she could react, he pulled her into a brief, warm hug. It was quick, appropriate, but her heart still raced. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Calls, emails, quick thank yous from their team back in Chicago. Everyone congratulated Daniel, but he made sure to give Emma credit every time. Couldn't have done it without her, he said more than once. That evening, he suggested they celebrate. "Nothing fancy," he said. "Just dinner. We've earned it." They found a small restaurant near the harbor, a quiet place with warm lighting and windows overlooking the water. The rain had left the air fresh and cool, and the reflection of the city lights shimmered on the waves. They ordered simple food, grilled salmon and salad, and for once, didn't talk about work. Daniel asked her about her life, her family, her dreams. She told him how she'd grown up in a small town outside Chicago, how she'd always been cautious, afraid of taking big chances. He listened intently, resting his elbows on the table. "You know," he said softly, "you don't seem afraid to me. You seem strong. You just hide it." Kima smiled, her cheeks warming. "Maybe I'm learning." He smiled back. "Maybe Seattle's been good for us both." For a few seconds, silence lingered. Not empty, but full of something that neither of them dared to name. The soft music, the glow of the lights, the way he looked at her. It all felt too real after dinner. They walked slowly along the waterfront. The air smelled of salt and rain. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, and Daniel offered his jacket. She hesitated before taking it, feeling the warmth still clinging to the fabric. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "I want to," he replied simply. They walked in silence for a while, the city lights flickering on the wet pavement. Then Daniel stopped. He looked out over the water, hands in his pockets, his voice low. "Emma, can I be honest with you?" Her heart skipped. "Of course." He turned to her, his eyes serious but gentle. "This trip, it wasn't supposed to feel like this. I mean, we came here for work. But somewhere between the meetings and the rain and the late nights, something changed." She swallowed hard. "Changed how?" He hesitated. "I don't know. I just know I don't want this to end when we go back." Emma didn't know what to say. Her chest tightened, not out of fear but confusion. She had felt it too, the connection, the unspoken warmth, but hearing him say it made it real. "Daniel," she began, but words failed her. He stepped closer, careful, respectful. "I'm not asking for anything you don't want," he said gently. "I just wanted you to know." The night wind blew softly between them. Emma looked down, trying to steady her breath. "It's just complicated," she whispered. "I know," he said, "and that's okay." For a long moment, they stood there, two people caught between reason and feeling, unsure of what would happen next. Then Daniel smiled faintly, trying to ease the tension. Let's not overthink it. Let's just finish this trip, go home, and see where life takes us. No pressure. She nodded slowly, grateful for his understanding. Okay, she said. They walked back to the hotel, quieter now, but not distant. Something had changed between them, not spoken aloud, not acted upon, but undeniably real. When they reached their room, Daniel stopped at the door. Emma, he said softly, you were amazing today. I hope you know that. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled, that same kind. Steady smile that had made her feel safe since day one. Good night, Emma. Good night, Daniel. Inside the room, she sat on her bed for a long time before changing for sleep. Her thoughts wouldn't settle. Every moment of the evening replayed in her mind, the hug, the walk, his words by the water. There was a warmth in her chest that scared her because it felt too real, too strong. Daniel was kind, successful, everything she admired, but he was also her boss. And that made everything complicated. When she finally lay down, she could see the faint outline of him at his desk, working quietly, even after midnight. There was something comforting about the sight. She realized then that what she felt wasn't just admiration. It was something deeper. Something she hadn't felt in years. And maybe, just maybe, he felt it too. Outside, the rain began again, soft and rhythmic against the window. The city lights blurred through the drops, casting a golden glow across the room. Emma closed her eyes, knowing that tomorrow they would return to Chicago, back to normal life, back to boundaries and routines. But a part of her already knew things would never be quite the same. Because some moments, no matter how brief, leave marks that don't fade. And as she drifted into sleep, she could still hear his words, gentle, sincere, echoing in her heart. I don't want this to end when we go back. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing for sure. The trip that began as business had turned into something far more personal, something she wasn't ready to lose. The flight back to Chicago felt longer than it should have. Emma sat by the window, staring at the clouds as the city below disappeared from view. Daniel was beside her, calm and quiet, scrolling through his phone, though his eyes looked distant. Neither spoke much, both lost in thoughts they couldn't quite share. Something between them had shifted in Seattle, something gentle but powerful. And now, returning to their everyday lives felt heavier than either expected. When the plane landed, Daniel carried both their bags without asking. You did great out there, he said simply as they waited for a cab. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Emma replied softly. It was a good trip, he smiled faintly. Yeah, it really was. The ride to the office was quiet. The city looked the same, but Emma felt different, more aware, more uncertain. Back in the familiar walls of the marketing firm, everything resumed as if nothing had happened. Emails, phone calls, meetings, life went on. But every time she saw Daniel walking through the halls, her heart betrayed her calm expression. For the first few days, they both pretended nothing had changed. They spoke professionally, exchanged polite smiles, and focused on work. But there were moments, fleeting glances during meetings, a shared pause at the coffee machine, that reminded them of what had quietly begun in Seattle. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by her desk. Do you have a minute? Of course, she said, following him to his office. He closed the door gently. I wanted to say thank you again for everything you did on the trip. The client sent an email this morning. They're thrilled. It's great news, she said, smiling. He nodded but didn't speak right away. Instead, he leaned against the edge of his desk, looking at her with that same calm warmth that made her feel seen. You've been quieter since we came back, he said softly. Is everything all right? Emma hesitated. I'm fine, just getting used to being back, I guess. He nodded slowly. Yeah, same here. For a moment, neither said anything. The silence was familiar now, comfortable, yet filled with things left unsaid. Finally, Daniel exhaled and smiled faintly. That trip reminded me how much I depend on you, not just as an employee, but as someone I trust." His words caught her off guard. "That means a lot," she said quietly. "It should," he replied, "because it's true." After that conversation, their connection settled into something unspoken but real. They didn't cross lines. They didn't say more than they should. But the way he treated her with quiet respect and warmth made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Valued. Weeks passed. The Seattle project became one of the company's biggest successes. Emma's confidence grew, and Daniel made sure everyone knew how important she'd been to it. But beneath all the praise and progress, that quiet bond between them kept deepening silently, carefully. One evening, long after most of the office had emptied, Emma was still at her desk finalizing a report. Daniel walked by, jacket over his shoulder. "You're still here." She smiled tiredly. "Trying to finish this before tomorrow." He chuckled. "You really don't know how to stop working, do you?" "Maybe I learned from you," she teased. He paused at her desk, smiling. "Touché?" Then, more softly, "Come on, Emma. Let's call it a night. You've done enough." They rode the elevator down together. The city lights shone through the glass walls of the lobby. And for a brief moment, the air between them felt like it had in Seattle, quiet but full of emotion. Outside, a light snow had started to fall. Daniel looked at her, his voice low. "There's something I've been meaning to say." Emma's heart skipped. "What is it?" He hesitated, searching for words. "I've been thinking about what I said in Seattle. About not wanting it to end." She froze, her breath visible in the cold air. "I meant it," he continued. "But I also know this isn't simple. We work together, and I don't want to make your life harder. He paused, then met her eyes. "I don't want to ignore something that feels real." Emma looked down at her gloves, unsure what to say. The world around them was quiet, except for the sound of distant traffic and falling snow. "It does feel real," she admitted softly. "But maybe we both need to figure out what it means before we do anything." He nodded, a small, understanding smile touching his lips. "That's fair. I can wait." Her heart softened. "You really would?" "For the right person." He met her gaze. "Yeah, I would." That night, Emma couldn't stop thinking about his words. She lay awake, realizing how much had changed inside her since that trip, how she no longer wanted to hide behind routine or fear. The next morning, she came to work early, as she always did. Daniel arrived later, greeting her with a simple good morning, like nothing had changed. But when their eyes met, there was quiet understanding. They didn't need to rush. Whatever this was, it didn't need labels yet. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a rhythm again. They worked together as always, professional, focused, but with an invisible connection that neither of them denied. Sometimes they shared lunch in the office cafeteria. Sometimes they stayed late discussing projects, laughing like old friends. There was comfort in the simplicity, but also a growing warmth that words couldn't define. One Friday evening, Daniel asked her to join him for coffee after work. It was snowing again, light flakes dancing through the streetlights. They found a small cafe near the office, quiet and warm, the air smelling of cinnamon and espresso. "I used to come here a lot when I first moved to Chicago," said, stirring his coffee. "Back then, I didn't know anyone. I just worked and came here to think." Emma smiled softly. "And now?" He looked at her, his tone gentle. "Now, I don't want to do everything alone anymore." She didn't answer right away. She just smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that said more than words. They talked for hours, not about work, but about life, about what they wanted, what scared them, and what they'd learned. There was no confession, no promises, no rush, just connection, calm and honest. When they left the cafe, Daniel walked her to her car. The snow had thickened, covering the ground in soft white. He stopped, hands in his pockets, and said, "Emma, whatever happens, I want you to know something. You changed how I see things, how I see people, how I see us." She looked up at him, her heart full. "You did the same for me." He smiled, and for a moment, They stood there in the falling snow, two people who hadn't planned any of this, but somehow found something worth holding on to. As she drove home that night, Emma realized life had quietly given her something rare, a connection born not out of chance, but trust, patience, and respect. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something real, something that grew slowly, like winter turning into spring. And though she didn't know where it would lead, she knew one thing for sure: the business trip that started as a simple assignment had changed her life forever. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself loudly. Sometimes it begins in silence, in shared work, shared laughter, shared rooms, and moments too small to notice until they become everything. Emma smiled to herself as snowflakes melted against her window. Life, she thought, was full of surprises, and this one she was ready for.